Matthew Segall received his doctoral degree in 2016 from the Philosophy, Cosmology, and Consciousness program at CIS. He teaches courses on German idealism and process philosophy for the Philosophy, Cosmology, and Consciousness program at CIS. He blogs regularly at footnotestoplato.com. David Abram is a cultural ecologist and geophilosopher. He is the author of Spell of the Sensuous and Becoming Animal, An Earthly Cosmology. David was perhaps the first contemporary philosopher to advocate for a reprisal of Indigenous animism. A close student of the traditional ecological knowledge of diverse Indigenous peoples, his work also articulates the entwinement of human subjectivity with the varied sensitivities of the plants upon whom we depend, as well as with the agency of particular places or bioregions that surround and sustain our communities. David has been the recipient of numerous awards, including the Rockefeller and Watson Fellowships and the International Lannan Literary Award for Nonfiction. He recently held the International Animist Chair in Global Justice and Ecology in Norway. He is the co-founder and director of the Alliance for Wild Ethics and a distinguished fellow of Schumacher College in England. And here they are. Now please join me in welcoming Matt and David. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. Hello, Dave.
Hello.
Great to be here in person with all of you. Thanks for coming out to this UU Center. Beautiful space, beautiful day for hopefully a deep and interesting conversation. I've been looking forward to this for actually over 2 years. This was supposed to happen in the BC era before COVID. I guess we're still obviously dealing with that. And to begin, I thought it would make sense to start in the present, which seems to me to be something like a state of normalized emergency, is one way of describing it, where in so many ways the world is pushing people to retreat, to escape, to not look at all the various ways in which an unraveling is occurring. And for someone like you who has been engaged in a form of philosophy that is calling us to return to our senses, how do you practice ecology in a time of planetary emergency like this, when it's pretty clear that the Earth seems to be in a decline ecologically? What does it mean to be an ecologist in that context for you?
It hurts.
Yeah.
It hurts. I reckon this is something we're all grappling with, everyone in this fine room. Whether you are an ecologist or a thief or a banker or a prophet or a monk, we're all confounded and massively confused and befuddled by what's coming down on every hand, sort of cascading calamities. Glaciers melting, oceans rising, wildfires spreading. It was weird coming here from New Mexico. I live in northern New Mexico, in the upper Rio Grande Valley, in the foothills of the Sangre de Cristo Mountains. Really beautiful terrain, homeland, many Pueblo peoples, the Tewa, Tiwa, and Towa speaking peoples who have tended the earth there for so long with so much care. But it's a land also tended and stewarded by the huge aspen groves upslope, and ravens and the coyotes who wake us up in the middle of the night, pretty much every night, and bobcat, and black bear, and great ponderosa pine trees. A luscious realm that is now home to a huge fire, the Hermit Peak fire, which is ever so steadily advancing toward my home terrain. So various friends back home know that they've just got to call me and let me know if it's encroaching a bit too close, and I've got to hightail it back. But I know you folks here in California are well acquainted with that sort of situation. But not just such things as fires and floods and droughts and never-before-seen hurricane winds, but, now the distant thunder of war, yet again, in the midst of a global pandemic. How to not become numb is, for me, a huge question. And a question I reckon probably most of you have found yourself wondering. And it's a puzzle for me. It's a big koan. The pinyon pines around my home, it's the land there is sort of polka dotted with pinyon pines and juniper trees, the red earth between them setting off these fairly low trees. But the pinyon pines all succumbed last summer from the drought to this opportunistic pine bark beetle. And many, many of them died. And in the last few days, the last 3 days, a team of folks have been cutting down these piñons. I didn't realize they were going to be doing that. I was out and about all day, got back after dark, and found myself, I was trying to read, get some work done in the evening. I found myself really glum, really blue, uncommonly. And I couldn't figure out, what is this ache? Went to sleep, tried to sleep, really fitful night. When the sun came up in the morning, I was still feeling just kind of miserable in my muscles and my body, and got up and went outside to just take a walk, and stepped into the trees and realized so many of these had just been lopped, cut the day before, and I hadn't realized they were going to be engaged in that in the neighborhood in hopes of protecting against fire, to remove some of the fuel, as it were, from the fire. I stepped out among all these trees and just sat on the ground and started weeping and realized, my body had just been picking up the dramatic, sudden absence of all these allies and friends and neighbors of my organism that suddenly were just not there, or were lying dismembered on the ground. Weeping. So it seems to me that the parched earth, this dry soil, at least where I live, the parched soil needs the water of our tears to know that we actually give a damn, that we're actually here. And so I've got no good answer to that question in the midst of so many compounding catastrophes. How do we not become numb, except something of keep listening close in to your muscled flesh. And when you feel joy, really express it and let it roll through you. Dance, sing and dance. Or write a poem, or 2 or 3. And when you feel an ache, or gloom, or sadness, let it roll through you also. Express it. Let the tears fall. Because that feeds the earth. And it feeds the bond and the rapport between your body and the earth. And it keeps stuff from getting stuck in here, which is what fosters that kind of numbness that we all, I think, are grappling with as things accelerate now.
Yeah. So you've been described, and describe yourself, I believe, as an animist. And I'd love to deepen into the meaning of this term and how it relates to coming to our senses, as it were, and re-inhabiting our bodies and being in the places that we find ourselves, rather than always rushing to be elsewhere in search of something that we imagine will be better than where we are. As an animist, you're talking about the grief you feel for the trees that were lost, and the tears that can be shed on behalf of all the various forms of life, organisms that are being pushed off their habitats and driven to extinction and so on. But what does animism mean for you? I assume it also implies that the mountains and the rivers and even the very air that we breathe has a kind of animacy. Yeah? And talk to us about how you came to that realization and what its relevance might be for this ecological unraveling that we find ourselves in.
Wow. Well, if I might pull back a moment to make a link with the prior question. Well, just to say, it seems to me that as things are unraveling further, and as there is this steadily accelerating loss of other species, as you speak, of other shapes of sentience and sensitivity, winking out of the world as we sit here together, talking. And as these onrushing weirdnesses, like this fire spreading toward my home in New Mexico, as these kinds of events intensify, I'd like to offer one clue that's been becoming more and more real to me, which is that the most efficacious response is to become more and more identified with your body. To become body. Identifying with your body not as, just the house or temple of your soul, but as the very shape of your sentience, as the very shape and texture of your soul. To identify with your creaturely flesh, your animal organism. Because this body is it's like the most exquisitely tuned instrument for sussing out any aspect of the real. It's far more tuned and attuned than any technology we will ever devise, seems to me. To become more and more identified with your body is to become more and more of your place. It's to wake up your animal senses and open the pores of your skin, your ears tuning into all these other voices that surround, your eyes becoming much more aware of the nuances and the subtleties in the scape around you, the soundscape for the ears, the colorscape for the eyes, but your skin, in fact, your whole synesthetic organism just starts blending with the terrain all around, so that you're not just noticing and attuning to and being tuned by these nuances in the surrounding world, but you can avail yourself of them. You know where to find particular pools or spaces of calm. You can even make yourself virtually invisible to onrushing wildnesses and wildfires as they move through. There are ways, always, in the land itself, in your rapport with the other animals, thereabouts, wherever you live. That, at least, it seems to me, is a key strategy for meeting the outrageous weirdness that is now upon us. So your question was, about animism. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I mean, the importance of embodiment is so crucial for Western cultures who are used to identifying with some invisible point somewhere behind their eyes, and the body is this baggage we have to carry around with us, particularly as we age. And but when you say identify with the body, I think you mean something different than the way that a 19th century materialist would refer to bodies, right? Because there's this animacy to the body as you're referring to it. So unpack that for us. How is animism different from materialism when clearly you're trying to call our attention to the materiality of our reality? Right?
I am indeed. And so in a sense, one could say, I suppose, that I'm a materialist, but I'm a matter realist, really.
Yeah.
I try and keep faith with the materiality of things. And I feel like our culture is, in ever so many ways, not material enough. No, it doesn't pay attention to the materials from which our houses are built, our furniture in our homes, the clothes even that we wear. Material or matter realist in the sense of, keeping faith with a sense of matter as something alive through and through. Matter not as something inert, inanimate, determinate, mechanical, or following purely mechanical laws of causation, but matter as mater, as matrix, as the womb of all things. That's the kind of matter realist, I suppose, that I am. To speak of the body from such a perspective is to speak of this outrageously gifted creature that we are, that is clearly has its density and weight. So it's by being a body among other bodies, it's my body that gives me access to all the other animals and to the plants as well, because there is something in me of that rooted verticality. In fact, once us four-legged creatures started standing up and balancing on our hind legs, suddenly all the trees became our closest allies in verticality. We have, by virtue of being body, we have a way of leaning into and sussing out something of the experience of any other body we encounter, whether that body be an earthworm or a ponderosa pine or a bobcat or a mountain or even a whole forest, even a building, a computer, because it's all alive. It's all, it's never entirely, utterly inanimate, inert. There is nothing, at least to my creaturely experience, that is utterly inanimate. We speak of how things catch our eye or call our attention or grab our focus. Even a stone, it snags my awareness. ooh, that was a cool stone as I'm cycling past, and I turn my bike around, go back and pick it up. Because there's something about that stone that caught my eye. It caught my eye. It grabs my focus. Things actively engage our organism, our body, and we respond to that engagement by maybe reaching out and touching that presence, to which the thing then itself responds by revealing something more of itself. That stone or this boulder shows me something of its grainy texture, to which I then respond by engaging further. And so perception is this sort of ongoing interchange or dialogue. It's a living reciprocity between my sensate body and the sensuous beings that I encounter. It seems to me that from our body's perspective, we know of no utterly inanimate, inert substance. That simply to perceive something is already to enter into a living exchange, a reciprocal encounter with that being. And so, animism, since you asked, is just a way of speaking in accordance with our sensate organism. It's a way of speaking in alignment with our body. It's a way of bringing our abstract intellect back into a kind of accord or alignment with its animal flesh.
Yeah. So the term itself, which you've repurposed in this positive sense, as I'm sure you know, comes out of 19th century anthropology, where Europeans and Americans were describing indigenous cultures and their worldview as, well, they're animist. And it seems that all human beings, for the first, 5, 6, 7, 8 years of our lives, are basically very much aware of what you're describing. And then in the modern West, for the last several hundred years, it gets beaten out of us. And we learn the alphabet.
Yes.
We're going to talk about that, as I'm sure you all know. We develop abstract thought, and we begin to not notice all of the agencies that are scintillating on the edges of our rational, conscious awareness.
Yes.
We could talk about how that happened, and I want to go into that. Usually we say, well, the scientific revolution and this mechanistic worldview led to the disenchantment of nature and so on. But I think there was a political project here, which is to develop human freedom. And human beings as individuals recognize their own freedom in contrast to the inert mechanism of nature.
Yes.
It seems to me that as soon as we step back into an animated universe, that's going to change how we think about our own freedom, right?
Hugely.
What does that look like? What's in store for us if we do step into a more ecological worldview? What is the politics that comes along with this ecology? I know that's a hard question, but it seems to me that it's very much alive.
Wow, that's
right
a big
now.
question. Well, I think I've already gestured a bit toward the matter of place.
Uh-huh.
Place and the politics of wonder. That is going local, it seems to me, is deeply key here. To notice that not just oneself, but the entirety of one's world is filled with agency, animacy, that things live in a gazillion different ways. I mean, I got to say that first, that animism, which, one could say the simple intuition that everything is alive, or that everything has its own interior animation, its own pulse, its own rhythm, its own way in the world, that each thing has agency, an ability to affect the space around it and the other beings, and even to affect us. What this does, first and foremost, is open the possibility of relation and reciprocity with every part of the surrounding field. And so the world immediately around you becomes really fascinating and like inexhaustibly so, because this sense that everything is animate, that everything moves, it's not a way into oneness. It's not a way into, oh, so it's all alive, so it's all one. No, it's actually a way into radical multiplicity, because it's as if the bifurcation of the world into animate and inanimate enables us to hide not from the oneness of things, it enables us to hide from the irreducible pluralism of the world. As soon as it's all alive, then I get to step up toward a slab of granite and say, how are you living? What is your way in the world? And how are you different? How is your way different from that of this sandstone boulder nearby? And inquire. And that is, each thing lives in its own way, in its own style. But yeah, the immediate, local world becomes a kind of universe. It becomes inexhaustibly strange in its ways and possibilities. Even the lichen spreading on this boulder. Whoa, what's this all about? Who are you? And why are this sort of crinkly red lichen, how are you different from this yellow one over here, which is not nearly so crinkly? What's going on there? So yeah, becoming local, opening one's sense of a kind of inexhaustible wonder at the weirdness of the real. And your kind of absolute freedom that you were speaking of, that we've celebrated for a while, it becomes a bit less absolute. You realize that you are profoundly dependent for your very breath upon all these other powers and beings and agencies around you, like all the plants who are breathing out the oxygen that we creatures take in and inhale and metabolize within our chest, circulate it through our limbs, and then alchemize it, transform it, and breathe out air infused now with the very ingredient that all these plants need to take in for their photosynthetic metabolism. So what we animals breathe out, all the plants are breathing in. And what the plants breathe out, all us animals are breathing. I mean, the world begins to become exquisitely marvelous to the animistic sensibility.
Yeah. I like that for you to be in place and to establish a relationship to your local environment actually entails being in a relationship to a multiplicity of different beings. Because usually, politically, when we think of localism, it'll be a more homogenous culture and less exposure to different kinds of people and so on. But this is a pluralistic localism, animistic localism, let's call it, where you inhabit a world that is far more populous than you even realized.
Indeed. And it's not, I don't mean to be saying only tuned to your locale, but first and foremost to this locale. And it does mean, walking up to those straight lines and right angles that you see on the map and, peering under them. What's actually here? Because The land doesn't have those straight lines and right angles between New Mexico and Arizona or Canada and the United States. What are the actual contours in the land itself, the real boundaries of the watershed, where everybody on this side of that mountain ridge shares the same water, not just us two-leggeds, but all the other creatures that inhabit the land here or migrate through when they're here. And can we begin to develop our politics and our economies in a way in service to the needs of the local earth and honoring not these straight-lined artificial boundaries on the map, but actually recognizing what this terrain and its actual contours really are. Who are my real neighbors here? Human and more than human. But each place, in this sense, is not just a world unto itself, because it connects at those bounds with all these other places that surround it. So it's as if one begins to perhaps sense Earth itself, this immense spherical metabolism in which our individual physiologies are embedded. But Earth itself as alive, breathing, a physiology, yes. But each place, each bioregion, each locale is like an organ of that wider flesh. Yeah, it's as if this body, this two-legged, two-armed form, is our smaller body, and the earth is my larger flesh. As flesh, it has different organs, just like my physiology does. The rainforest, even the temperate rainforest up north of here, the high desert where I live, each place, the Hudson River estuary where I grew up in New York, each bioregion, its own rhythm and style of life, its own state of mind, really. It's as if each place is its own organ within the larger flesh of the breathing earth. I can't help but think that our economics and our politics, sooner or later, if we are to have anything of a future, will begin to align and ally itself with the deep needs of the breathing earth itself. Yeah.
It strikes me that a human species that became more attuned to the surrounding environment through the senses might have an easier time communicating across linguistic barriers, that in some sense re-inhabiting our bodies, which are the same across cultures, and our sensory apparatus, which are the same across cultures, might actually afford us some way forward politically, geopolitically, as much as ecologically.
I would think so. It does seem to me that we don't have a hint of a hoot, of a chance of healing our various social injustices and massive interhuman violence, these internecine wars that we keep sparking up between one another, without a sort of collective turn away from just gazing at each other and battling out over particular words, particular things we disagree with, particular beliefs, turning together toward the land and asking the ground, what do you need of us here? What does this place ask of us? And that very gesture of turning away from just being focused just on ourselves toward the more than human context and asking of it, that very gesture, it seems to me, begins to draw the human population into a new alignment with itself, eases a lot of the brittleness of our internecine, interhuman discord.
Yeah. So you've studied with various indigenous peoples in the Western United States. You've studied in Asia with traditional magical practitioners and healers, and you also have drawn on, and I think personally connect with some with the biblical traditions in some way. And given all of this, what future do you see for religion and or spirituality? And we can talk maybe about what the difference between the two are, but what is the future of religion and spirituality in an ecological context if we do attune to our senses again and rediscover an animate earth? What sort of religion would be flowering, or religions in such a context, do you think?
Interesting question.
Is there a place for religion in that context, or would you describe it as something else entirely?
Well, I would say, given the propensity of religious forms to nudge our attention out beyond the sensuous into relation with a transcendent source that is radically outside or beyond or beneath or behind. It seems to me perhaps that that the move, the deeply ecological move that I'm trying to tickle my compatriots into is a move toward a kind of radical immanence, a deeply immanent, radically immanent sense of the sacred that in a sense is very contrary to what we have associated with religion for far so long. I don't know that the indigenous brothers and sisters I lived among in Indonesia, or even the Pueblo allies where I live back home, I don't know that their belief system or worldview or cosmovision is rightly called a religion, because it's so palpably in relation to the actual terrain around them and the elements that compose that terrain, the animals, the plants, but even the winds and the weather powers, the particular way that the sunlight is held in the air in that part of this continent. Immanence. So perhaps what we're speaking of is a relation to the holy that preceded all of the world religions, and that will outlast all of the large formal religions, because it's always been there underneath these formal religious structures, secretly nourishing them from below. It's the body's faith, a faith not in a radical transcendent source, but a faith in the return of light every dawn, in the nourishment of the air, in the gestation of seeds, and a faith in mountains and rivers. Is that a faith? I think so. It's the body's faith.
Yeah. When you spread agency throughout the world and cease from keeping it contained just within the human, it seems to me that one way of describing what that entails is that it's like there are little transcendences populating the entire earth, in the sense that each agent is a source of creative surprise that's, profoundly relational, but not determined by those relationships. I mean, agency is, there's a creative will there that's present in all the creatures that compose the world. And so I guess rather than totally eliminate transcendence and just have the immanence, it's like we can see how, well, the transcendence pops up everywhere. And
Exactly.
You know?
That's gorgeous. It's that...
you can write about it, because I won't be able to.
But it's just
run with that as well as
transcendence.
you can.
Wherever you turn,
Yeah.
there is transcendence.
Yeah.
That is just how I see it. Yeah.
Wonderful.
That is just how I see it. Yeah.
So let's talk a bit about your first book, Spell of the Sensuous.
Okay.
I was rereading some of it in the last several days, and first of all, it's astounding that someone of such erudition and poetic capacity could, at the same time, raise such a profound critique of the effects of the alphabet on consciousness.
Huh.
And I think you're not, the irony of that is not lost on you by any means. But I wonder how do you reconcile with the sense in which you yourself are so possessed by this alphabetic mode, right?
Huh.
As I assume we all are, as speaking, writing, English-speaking human beings. Maybe you're multilingual here, but you still have an alphabet. We have this way of using this very tool to turn back upon the tool and ask, should I really be using this tool? Or how is this tool blinding me from the animate earth?
Right.
So talk to us about how you came to this insight, this relationship to the alphabet.
It's a good question. I mean, gadzooks. So for those of you who know this particular book of mine, The Spell of the Sensuous, it's by no means the whole book, but it is one of the arguments threaded throughout the work. Is the very strange influence of formal writing systems upon our senses, and looking even at how different writing systems affect our senses in different ways, but how the alphabet or phonetic writing profoundly alters our sensory relation to the surrounding sensuous earth. And also how writing and the alphabet alters our experience of language and linguistic meaning. Because when we speak of indigenous, traditionally animistic, or traditionally, peoples of place, we are by and large speaking of traditionally oral cultures, cultures that developed and flourished often century after century, millennia after millennia, without or in the absence of any formal system of writing that is coupled to their spoken language. And so it's an interesting question, this difference. But gadzooks, Matt, I gotta say, it's been the most common misunderstanding that we meet out there in the world, that I've met out there in the world, of my work, is that, like, oh my God, Abram says the alphabet is the cause of all of our problems, that writing, is bad. And yet, look, the guy's written a whole book, and he's written it with a kind of love of language, and it's very sort of a literary text. We seem to have caught him in a performative contradiction. And they just have not been reading carefully enough. I love the written word. I am not saying that writing is bad. I'm certainly not saying that the alphabet is evil. I am saying, rather, that writing is magic. and that the alphabet is a very powerful form of magic, a very concentrated form of animism. I mean, we come down in the morning, open up a newspaper, and focus our eyes on these ostensibly inanimate bits of ink on the page, and suddenly we hear voices. And we see visions of events happening on the other side of the world. This is animism, folks. This is magic. I mean, it's not that different from an indigenous Pueblo woman stepping out from the Pueblo into the woods and coming upon, yes, like a boulder I was speaking of earlier with all of these crinkly lichens spreading on it. And she focuses her eyes on a patch of lichen and suddenly hears the rock speaking to her. Or a man walking under a tree and sees a spider slowly weaving its web between two branches of that tree. Or maybe his face snags on the spider web and then he steps back and looks for that spider. I'm sure this has happened to each of us at some point or other. And when you catch sight of that spider, it's like, ooh, there she is. And you focus in, and suddenly you hear the spider speaking to you. Or at least many of my allies in the traditionally oral indigenous world hear themselves addressed by such diminutive beings, as well as by very large beings, like wolf or bear, but sometimes even spider. Well, we do the very same thing with our scratches and scripts. We focus our eyes on those bits of ink, and we hear voices, and we see visions. This is an intensely concentrated form of animism, but it is animism nonetheless, as outrageous as a talking stone or a speaking spider. And so it's just that this very concentrated form of magic effectively eclipses all of the other modalities of participation in which we used to engage, not just with spiders and animal tracks and bent branches and cloud shapes, but I mean with basically everything in the world that we've stepped into relation with could sometimes address us and speak to us. Now we have, with the written word, stepped into a richly and almost exclusively human conversation with our own human tracks leading across the white expanse of the page. So it's a big shift. It's a huge change. If you want to wonder about the origin of our sense of a private interior, that we each carry around this inner world within us, I think you'll find that origin point right there as we step into formalized writing, and in particular to the phonetic alphabet. But I'm not saying the alphabet is bad. I'm saying the alphabet is magic. And if we don't recognize it as such, then you tend to fall under its spell, which is the spell of spelling. Really. It's like, wow, it's written, so it must be true. You all know that experience.
Especially on the internet. Yeah.
Indeed. So wow, if you do recognize it as a magic, a very powerful magic, then you can wield it responsibly and place also the written word back in service to the whole more than human field of voices, like a writer like Mary Oliver does, or Wendell Berry, or Henry David Thoreau, or Gary Snyder, your great Californian cat, and so many other luminous women and men. Mm-hmm. Terry Tempest.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we've got 10 minutes to continue, and then we're going to open it up to questions. Actually, they'll be on the iPad.
I've got a question for you.
Oh.
'Cause I actually, when CII asked if I would come and do something with you guys, I said, sure, what do you want me to do? And they said, well, we don't want you to give a talk. We'd like you to be in conversation. We'll come up with someone. I said, well, no, if you're having me out there, it's got to be Matt Segall. We'd not met until now. We'd not even corresponded until after they, CIS said yes. But I'm sure many of you know, but Matt is a powerful philosopher in his own right. I find much of the work you've been doing really compelling and fascinating to me. So you've been asking me these questions about animism, and it has not, escaped my notice that much of your writing engages something that folks today call panpsychism. Are these very different, or are they two ways of speaking the same enigmatic wonder?
I think they overlap profoundly. They could be synonyms, but panpsychists tend to want to get into arguments with each other about what it means, whereas animists seem perfectly fine to just zip it and experience what's going on out there.
I see.
So in other words, panpsychism is like this philosophical category that is, I think of it as an alternative to the other major games in town in terms of metaphysics, the ultimate nature of reality.
I see.
Materialism, though I mean in the sort of 19th century reductionistic sense, idealism, dualism, and then panpsychism. There's probably other ways you can, dice it up, but those seem to me to be the four major options. And panpsychism or animism, I think, avoids the excesses of the others.
Right.
Materialism's too deflationary. Idealism, too inflationary.
Right.
Makes mind everything, and
Yes.
it's all one.
Yes.
Right? And dualism's kind of incoherent. So panpsychism would be the view that, mind is everywhere. There's a soul of the world. There's a soul in everything, in each thing. And you emphasize embodiment. I tend to think of bodies as expressions of soul. Yeah. There's in your book, Spell of the Sensuous, you talk about the Hopi language and how they have these two different senses of reality as manifested and manifesting.
Manifesting, yes.
And soul for me is the manifesting, right? And manifested would be sort of when the soul expression has become arrested in that instance, okay, then it's manifested and we think of it as no longer as living as it was in the manifesting phase.
Got it. Body for me, I suppose, combines both of those.
Sure.
It's clearly manifest in many of its aspects, and yet so much of it is hidden even from me. And it's up to things going on all the time, not just in my gut, but in every little, digit and knuckle of my digits. Things are preparing, are brewing, unfurling themselves, and often taking me by surprise. But yes, so it would be hard for me to say that each thing has a soul. It's more that each thing is a soul, that the body is the very texture and flesh or shape of this mystery we call soul or mind. But this is
words.
We're very close, and yet it's very, it's slightly divergent ways of speaking. It's true. Those who would hold or feel comfortable with a sense of animism, many of whom would not even necessarily know the term animism,
Yeah.
but they are, it's not a logical, it's not a logical position. It's an experiential stance in relation to the rest of the real, and it comes into being, or it's discussed not because it solves or solves any sort of philosophical, logical incoherence, but because of a kind of ethical imperative to step into full-bodied relation with the palpable actuality of the world that surrounds us. How is it that we have become so deaf to all these other voices that don't speak in words, so blind to anything that's not human or of human invention, that we can so casually bring about by our lifestyles the extinction of all of these other shapes of sensitivity and sentience? How can we undo that? Is there a way of just rapidly shifting that blindness, that deafness? And I think that's what certainly motivates my wish to speak in these ways. Yeah.
We have a few minutes left here. I will say, I think I am both an animist and a panpsychist, because they're different in the sense that you were hinting at. Animism is more experiential. There are an increasing number of analytic philosophers of mind who adopt panpsychism, but as a logical exercise. And when you actually, and I've asked some of them, well, how do you feel about the mountain over there? Or how do you feel about, the water that comes out of the faucet or the water in the river? Do you feel the presence of another being or beings, sharing a place with you when you encounter them? And the answer is usually no. There's no experiential grasp of what, if panpsychism were true, what it would mean for us as embodied creatures.
How very strange. How very strange.
It's a little frustrating.
It is.
To be an academic having these conversations, and panpsychism sounds so cool, but if it just stays in the classroom and in the books, it's like,
oh yeah,
how is it helping the world?
Another slight difference is that animism it's a more, perhaps a more mythopoetic way of addressing this sense of being immersed in sentience. But
although Pan and Psyche are also mythic beings, right? So.
Yeah, very mythic beings. Just like animism comes from anima, the Latin word for the soul, which originally means a breath or a gust of wind. It actually comes from the older Greek term anemos, which means wind. And so this sense of everything in motion, very sensuously, is also just a noticing that we live immersed in this unseen, invisible medium of air that sometimes, that sets everything in motion when the wind is moving. And yet it's also has these cool pools of calm on certain days, that the air itself is aware. Yeah.
You've given some talks and I think written a bit about what you call the Commonwealth of breath.
Yes.
And developed this analogy between mind and air, and that in some ways we are inside of a kind of atmospheric consciousness.
Yes.
Very panpsychist, very animist. I love it. In the context of two, I'll call them natural disasters. Some people think COVID was a lab leak, but even if it was, they were only studying it because of the risk of spillover events due to habitat loss. And so ultimately, what's the difference? Climate change, COVID, affecting the air we breathe and the atmosphere of this planet. what does that tell us about consciousness? What does that tell us about the sort of intention that we would need to cultivate and develop to respond to the climate crisis? If we think about it in an animistic way, not just as, oh, there's too much CO2 in the air out there, we're actually breathing that in from moment to moment too. So how does the animistic view of climate change, and or the pandemic change our situation, or what does it?
Well, I think both of these are instances where the palpable thickness, the meaning-filled richness of the invisible medium that connects you and I up here, and all of us sharing breath within this room with one another. Yet we live in a civilization, a rather goofy civilization, that thinks that since we can't see it, there's nothing of much consequence here between us. We don't speak of the air between us, we speak of the space between us, or the space between you and a nearby tree. It's empty space. And so it's a void, right? And so it's a perfect place to toss everything we wish to avoid, all the toxic byproducts of our industries, of our fossil-fueled automobiles, and giant tankers out at sea lugging thick tar sands, crude to be processed in foreign ports. Whatever, spills and spews out of those smokestacks and farts out of the exhaust pipes of our trucks and automobiles, and dissolves into the unseen air. We think, whoa, look, the smoke, it's just dissolving into the air. And we think, out of sight, out of mind. We don't need to worry about it. It's gone. But for our indigenous oral ancestors, that which dissipates as smoke and dissolves into the invisible atmosphere is by that very gesture entering into the mind, wind mind of the world, from which we all drink steadily. The animistic sense of mind is not of that I have a little mind inside me and you have a little mind inside you, and then we get to argue about whether that squirrel has a little mind inside its head, but rather is a recognition that there is something interior about the mind. But it's not because it's inside us, it's because we are inside it, bodily, immersed, along with all these other bodies of people and great blue herons and spiders and oak trees. We are immersed in a mind that is not ours, but is rather the earth's. That mind moves and blows through all of us, and each being partakes and participates in this vast sentience. I don't know, Matt, what is climate change if not the simple consequence of forgetting the sacredness of the invisible air or atmosphere and beginning to treat it as just empty space, or rather to treat it as a convenient dump site for all of our toxins. In doing that, it's like we were making burnt offerings back to some slumbering power, some God, some wild agency that, stirred from its slumber, would begin to bite us. And we are living at that moment. And the bite is coming hard.
Yes. So let's transition now to questions.
Great.
That are coming in from online, and I think some of you may have, who are here with us, have submitted them before the event. So let's start with a question from Emily. Emily writes, I'm really inspired by the presence you describe within the body while in nature, and I love the experiences I've had myself in that state. But often when I'm in the wild, when I try to immerse myself with my moving, sensing body, I experience many barriers, both internal and external, uncomfortable surfaces, thorns blocking paths, snakes to look out for, insects ready to traverse a body near the earth. Do you experience these less pleasant barriers? And if so, how do you navigate them and remain in a place of curiosity and a place of participation?
And what's the name of that?
That's Emily.
Thanks, Emily. It's a great. Are you in the room, by the way? Hey, yeah. Great question, important one, because it, helps us acknowledge from the get-go that I don't know if we've even used the term nature here, but I've spoken of the more than human world. Yeah, nature, the earth-born world. There's certainly this sense of wonder, even a kind of enchanted weirdness and wildness and wonder to this world. But at least it seems to me it's not a particularly nice world. It's certainly not sweet. To wake up in my creaturely body, to wake my animal senses really up, is to begin to notice that I live inside something huge, vast, filled with aspects that beckon to me, but others that really push me away. And it's to wake up within a world where there are things out and about that can eat me and ultimately will eat me. Not just really big things, but even tiny things like COVID-19. That is what we so placidly call nature and associate with a kind of bucolic sweetness is not bucolic. It's wild. And we are now living into the consequences of treating it as if it was just nice and sweet and very welcoming of our toxins. So I'm sure you know this very, very well yourself, but I'm just wanting to underscore a wild world is inexhaustibly vast and beyond our ken, beyond ever our fathoming fully with our intelligence or our intellect, a world to which we can only apprentice ourselves to some aspect of it or some part of it or some piece, some place within it, and learn how to dance well with the other dancing beings that surround. But that means being able to also work with grief, as we started our conversation, because that world is riven by loss and predation and difficulty. And but if it wasn't, it wouldn't be beautiful. Might be pretty, but without shadow, there's no beauty. If it wasn't shot through with all those grief tones, it wouldn't be so damn joyfully, outrageously holy. It just wouldn't be, yeah.
Well, Heidegger quotes the poet Hölderlin saying something like, where the danger is, there grows also the cure. I think that's relevant here.
Yeah, very much so. Also to say without becoming well acquainted with those that anguish and that ache and the losses and grieving those losses. I don't know, maybe you might taste of happiness, but never of joy. Joy, it seems to me, from my body's perspective, the word joy has that "j" sound at the beginning of it. It's the j. It's that friction. It's j. It's that edge of shadow and those grief tones that make something not just happy, but deeply joyful. It's a full-bodied sensation of being here, being apart, being inside. Blessed be, yeah.
Yeah, I feel that. So you've spoken a bit about this, but this anonymous question from the audience is, they're asking if you can share more about the wide array of indigenous worldviews or cosmovisions and how they play a role in inspiring your own work, your own thinking, your own processes.
The wide array, no, I can't say that much about the wide array because they're so divergent and different from one another. Even just, the Puebloan cosmology where I live is so outrageously divergent from the coastal Northwest, the Coast Salish peoples in their cosmovision. I mean, and then there are those of the Pitjantjatjara in Central Australia, or the Sami of Northern Scandinavia, or the Ogoni of Nigeria. I mean, outrageously divergent worldviews, visions of the world. It's sometimes hard to even believe they exist on the same planet. They must be not just different planets, they seem like different solar systems. And yet they have these few weird commonalities, like a refusal to make any neat bifurcation between that which is animate and that which is inanimate. Rather, for each of these cultures, for some reason, as outrageously different from one another as they are, everything is animate. Everything moves. It's just some things move a lot slower than other things, like, the floor of this room or these walls, and yet they still move. And that's just obvious to any people that has not gotten a little too overeducated or a little too bamboozled by their tools and technologies. And one other commonality I'll mention that's been implied by the conversation Matt and I have been having, but it bears mentioning, even though it's probably obvious to anybody listening, which is, it's not just that everything is alive or that everything moves, it's also that everything speaks, or rather everything is expressive. Each thing, any being, if you attend closely to it, is speaking, is uttering forth something of itself. And not in words. Most things don't speak in words, but they speak in rhythm, they speak in melody, like many of the birds, in cricket rhythms, but even the rhythm of waves splashing on the beach is a kind of voice. The howl of the wind in the wind in the willows, right? That too is a voice. The thunderstorm, thunder, whoa, like big word. Y'all know this amazing fragment of a poem by Gerard Manley Hopkins. He's talking about each thing speaking like the strings of a violin or a guitar. Those speak, but also a stone falling down a well. That speaks too, but also the bow of a bell, like any bell has like a cast bronze bell has a bow at the top of it. And he speaks of the voice of the bell. Here's his poem. It's a little piece of a poem. He says, as kingfishers catch fire, dragonflies draw flame. As tumbled over rim in roundy wells, stones ring. Like each tucked string tells, each hung bell's bow swung finds tongue to fling out broad its name. Each mortal thing does one thing and the same, deals out that being indoors each one dwells. Selves goes itself, myself it speaks and spells, crying, what I do is me, for that I came.
Beautiful.
He's amazing.
Yeah, yeah.
Hopkins. Yeah.
So we have a question from Siddhika, who writes, I can feel the life force of a tree or a spider or a mountain, but what about a microwave? What about a coffee-making machine? Are you still able to access the life of these manufactured items so far from their natural origins and be in relationship with them?
Well, if you make use of a coffee machine, you better be in relation with it. I think, your question's a good one, but I mean, if one is allowing, and got to check everything we're saying with your own body and touch in. If it doesn't, see if it doesn't make sense to you to allow each thing its open-ended animacy or its dynamism. If that doesn't make your senses wake up to where you are a lot more. Well, you can't open them in that way and say, yeah, except I'm not going to allow this, plastic cup in on this experience, or this coffee making machine, or the microwave oven. What are microwaves if not a kind of dazzlingly desperate and perhaps somewhat infernal energetic dynamism that fries your food without your even being aware of it. That's a magic I'd prefer to, have very little to do with, because the thing with animism or magic or however you speak these things, it's like I was saying in response to the first question, it's not about waking up to a world that is nice. It's about waking up within an inherently dangerous world. And the danger, the risk, which we shield ourselves from when we live in cities and surrounded by electric lights that hide the nighttime and air conditioning that sort of obfuscates the actual air and the changes within the wind and the atmosphere. And yet, even in the middle of the city, we live at the behest of powers that are huge and immense relative to the scale of our bodies. So I think it's important to realize that there's a kind of danger inherent in being alive, in being deeply a part of the real. And it's that danger that wakes up your senses and keeps your senses very acutely aware. So a coffee pot. I don't know. I'll just say I had a friend who would confront me over and again saying, yeah, Abram, sure, it's all alive, except give me a break, not plastic. plastic, it's so deadening to me when I'm surrounded by it. To which I had to say, yeah, man, you know, I hear you, but if you really think plastic is inanimate and inert, then you can't account for the deadening effect that it has upon you. It has this radiant power that irradiates your body whenever you're near it or surrounded by or living on linoleum tile floors or whatever it was he was fetching about. Yeah, I think it's not to say that everything is happy in its life or is enjoying its groovy existence. No, when you get into conversations with the buildings in any city, you'll find some of those buildings that of a very modernist design that, at least to my body, you know, when you inquire how they're doing, they just say, you know, I'm translating here. This is it. But they say, get me out of this rectilinear shape. You know, I can't even feel the wind as it licks me. Can you introduce some curves or something in my... And you begin to understand why everybody who works in the offices in that building just keeps enacting the destruction of the world, because the building itself is so uptight. So, yeah, entering into dialogue with things, even and especially your coffee maker, I think is a very useful and good thing to do.
Yeah. So, last question. What can we learn from children about animism? What kinds of questions can we ask our young ones to learn from them and their sense of wonder and aliveness?
Ask it one more time.
What can we learn from children about animism? What sort of questions can we ask our youth to learn from them and their sense of wonder and aliveness?
Yeah. Well, first, just to say, it ain't about the term animism. Who cares what one calls this way of feeling, sensing, speaking, and relating to the world? We could call it by 1,000 different names or nothing. It's a way of listening toward things and toward the ground underfoot and toward the commonwealth of breath around us. And nothing can teach us better how to do this than our kids and children, because they are born native to this kind of instinctive sensibility. Not that a child has it in full. My daughter, when she was little, would enter into rich conversations with the apple tree outside our house, and she felt that tree very much as dialoguing with her. But she also seemed to sense it as being almost human in its way of being and its way of feeling. And so her conversations, yeah, I don't know. It seemed, though, that once a child grows a little older, at, like 7 years of age, 8 years of age, begins to get that, wow, that tree can't move around like I do. I mean, it moves, but wind helps it move, but it's kind of stuck with its feet or its toes or its roots in the ground. And so what is that? What's it like to live in that way? What's that feel like? And then the child growing older still, are coming into adolescence, beginning to learn about photosynthesis and what it is to be drinking sunlight steadily with your leaves or your needles, and tracking the sun across the sky and just imbibing that food, that radiant food, while with your toes, you're sort of searching out and slurping up moisture in the ground, particularly after any rain where we live. It's just like, whoa, what would it be to have toes that just sort of send out little toelets and slurp up that. So you begin at each stage of childhood or development, even as you come into adulthood, you're getting more and more of a sense of the otherness of each being, how weirdly different from you that being is. And I think it's only as you come into maturity that you really have the possibility of thinking like a mountain, as Aldo Leopold says it, of really being able to respect the radical alterity or the radical otherness of another being, of a spider, of a toad, of a humpback whale, ponderosa pine tree, or a whole grove of aspens. Whoa. And you step into that grove and you're like, you step inside a whole state of mind, a living sentience that envelops you. So children can teach us ever so much.
I think of it, infants tend to explore the world with their mouths. They'll put anything in their mouth, right? You have to keep an eye on them, but it's like we have this instinct to get in touch with the world and even to bring it into ourselves and to learn by sensing. And then as we get more and more educated, we think, oh, learning is something you do from books. And we lose that childhood sense of learning through sensation, learning through encounters with the non-human.
Yes.
It seems to me that it wouldn't be that hard to keep alive this natural sense of wanting to be in touch with the world.
I think that's true. And I think that strategy or tactic I was suggesting of getting ever more identified with your animal organism, with your body, is a tactic that brings you in contact with all of the other ages of your life, and beginning to realize, oh, I'm still that little kid. Really important to keep that alive, I think.
Yeah. Dave, it's been a delight to share air with you and all of you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.